and if you know, in BMC schools, yes, I think last year they came up with a 5 prelim test program in December itself.
Oh,
So
Yeah,
can you
right.
imagine the amount of pressure
okay.
the student?
Nina, we'll chat later. I think
Yes, I know.
first I tell us to.
Sure, 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 sure. No worries, no worries, no worries.
Excellent. Well, today we have our guest, Miss Niyati Serene, with us. She has had 25 years of experience in the area of sustainability, CSR, branding, marketing, risk management, and all the areas in the management sector. She has also been on the think tank of GRI, CRESS, ECRI, UNGC, WEF, and her case studies, the work that she has done and implemented, has been used as case studies in INSEAD, France, and King's College, UK. She is one of the very well-renowned CSR and sustainability practitioner, and we would like to welcome her and learn about her journey from an engineer to a CSR leader. Welcome, Niyati.
Thank you, Harsha. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here to chat this evening. Well, the question that you posed is, what's my journey like been from being an engineer to a CSR person? You know, engineering is a state of mind, truly speaking. It's an attitude. Uh, the course of engineering that I did was completely obsolete. I graduated in 1989, where what the course that I studied had nothing to do with real life. But gave me an attitude. It taught me how to look at a big picture and how to put small blocks in it to perform. It taught me how to be a problem solver. It taught me how to do project management. So, truly speaking, my engineering degree, from a domain perspective, I didn't learn anything. When I went to work in an engineering firm where I'd worked for more than 25 years, they realized very early on that she has no domain knowledge, but she's got all these other strengths of problem solving, of implementation, of project management skills, and to be an influencer to get the work done. So that's how, if you look at my work, it's been in various areas, because everywhere when there was a situation where a new idea was being incubated, a new process was being incubated, they needed somebody to implement that new idea, you know, and to put it into the regular business of the work of the company. And well, so that's my journey been. And then when I moved into sustainability and CSR, I think one of the reasons that I was moved from a business role to a sustainability and CSR role was because they wanted to look at sustainability and CSR from a business perspective, not from a social development perspective. Then there is more buy-in from the business who's making money, whose money you're spending, right?
Yeah.
So it was a strategic decision to move me from business to social sector. And truly speaking, once I moved there, I finally at age 40, I realized that was my calling. I mean, till then, I don't know what I was doing. So at age 40 is when I realized, yes, this is what I want to do. And once you know that this is what is you like and it's becoming a passion, then you immediately excel in it, you know, because it comes from the heart. You put in all your best and you're passionate about it. So yeah, so that's been my journey from being an engineer to a CSR professional, truly speaking.
And now at Hinduja Group, what all is the work that you are doing? What are your projects that you've undertaken?
Sure. So Hinduja Group mainly consists of, in India, about 14 odd companies. Some of the brands that you will identify is with the IndusInd Bank, Ashok Leyland, Gulf Oil. Some of these brands are one that are consumer centric, so you will have a recall value. The other 11 companies some of them are very large. They're in the software space. They're in the financial and leasing space. We have a renewable energy company which is really large. We have a power company that has a huge thermal power station in Visakhapatnam. So it's a very large group with with areas in automobiles, oil and gas, banking and financial sector, renewable energy, power, and the newer fields that are coming up, cyber crime and things like that. And the foundation, the Hinduja Foundation, is part of the Hinduja Group, and it was started. It was started by the founder of Hinduja Group, Mr. Parmanand Hinduja, and he believed that my dharma is to work so that I can give. So earlier on, from 1918 to 1919, he, from his personal capacity, did a lot of philanthropic work. And over time, he set up the Hinduja College in Mumbai, which you would know. Hinduja Hospital in Mahi, which is one of Western India's best hospital, was set up post-partition for all the refugees that were coming in and needed healthcare. There's another Hinduja Healthcare Hospital in Khar. There is another hospital in Bangalore. So earlier on in the life of a Hinduja Foundation and Hinduja Group, it was mostly philanthropic in setting up institutions. But over time, each group company had, we didn't have to wait for the CSR statutory requirement of 2% for our group companies to be working. I think before the statutory requirement of 2%, our group companies were spending much more than 2% in their sustainability and CSR front. So across the group and Hinduja Foundation, we have 3 champion causes. Water is one, education, and we have health. And in water, we look at 3 different areas. One is access to safe drinking water, restoration of ponds, lakes, tanks, step well now, drains, rivers, nalas. And the third is large-scale watershed, spring shed, wetland restoration. So that's in the water space. That's really my domain expert, because even in my earlier life, and I'm an civil engineering stroke environmental engineer. So, and then in education, we work in early learning, from grade 2 to grade 8, where we are trying to bring them up to grade level, class level, spoken English, maths. There's a lot of emphasis on health and nutrition. Nutrition being not the midday meal, but breakfast. So that's a really large program we have. We've also incorporated WASH. We've incorporated sports and music in the education. And in the education sector, we really work in rural government schools, very few urban schools, but most of them are really, really remote schools. And the third area that we work in education is skill and livelihood training. Again, it's a selfish motive, because we're trying to create our own future employees. So that's another area. And in health, different companies do different things, but it's mostly primary health area. At the foundation, we are working with T1 diabetes, which is something that is not known, but is really, really prevalent. So there's a lot of awareness work that we are doing. There's a lot of work that we are doing in supporting underprivileged children that have this disease so that they can cope with life. We're also looking at mental health. So these are the 3 large, really chunks of the group's CSR and the foundation CSR initiatives. Apart from that, there is a lot of work that we are doing in rural development, which comes under water. In water, we look at both the water supply and the demand side. At the foundation, we have a huge arts and culture wing. We have a very, very large inheritance, which is known as the Lansdane's inheritance. It's probably got the world's best coin collection. Some of the coins are, earliest. I cannot even remember the date, but they're like the earliest coins that have ever existed and are not available anywhere in any museum in the world. So we have that inheritance, and we're very proud of it, and we're working to showcase it to the public. At our bank, IndusInd Bank, sports is a very large vertical. They support a lot of disabled athletes and paralegal athletes. In the Olympics, many of the gold medalists were supported by IndusInd Bank. At other group companies, again, it looks at the stakeholders that we have. The stakeholders could be our immediate societies that live in our vicinities or our customers in the case of rural bank and in our financial and leasing. And we also have one of the largest MFIs in the group, Bharat Financial. So again, there's a huge rural customer base that we have. So yeah, so these are the broadly the big areas that we work in across the group. Yeah, go ahead, Asha.
Now, all the projects that you've been doing, what are the success indicators in water project or education project? How do you say that this is a successful project or this is just a learning?
See, everything begins with a learning, and over time, you develop those success indicators. It doesn't happen overnight. You know, some of our learnings are so tough. Some of the toughest projects, our impacts are the highest, but our delivery has been so tough. Access to safe drinking water has been one of those, but the impact has been immediate. You know, for me personally speaking, one of the biggest indicators is when you self-sufficient a society, when you make a society resilient to take care of their own needs themselves. You know, that's why I was asking you all those questions about the social entrepreneur course that you're running, because truly speaking, you can come and do whatever you want and go away. But if the person, your beneficiary that you are working with, doesn't become self-reliant and resilient, your success is not there. Your success is basically all external. It's not internal. So for me, one of the biggest indicators is how successful have we been making our beneficiary, who is really the poorest of poor, strong, to start to think to himself, to be able to provide for himself, to be able to look at water or education from a perspective that he thinks that all the indicators, and we have all the impact studies, those matrices are all there. But truly speaking, from a subjective point of view, that's what I look at. How strong am I making my beneficiary, and how resilient a society am I leaving behind? Yeah.
So you have been a civil engineer and you worked in the construction industry for more than 2 decades. Now, what is the state of green building in India, considering climate change is getting more and more prominent? Somewhere there is drought, and today there are floods all over. So what is the state?
My experience has really not been in the building sector. I worked in the construction industry and the infrastructure sector. So I worked in projects which were large hydropower projects, nuclear. We built most of the nuclear power stations in this country, thermal power station, all the metros, the underground tunnels, the dams, bridges, roads. You know, most of the iconic bridges in this country, including the Bandra-Worli Sea Link, has been built in the organization that I work in. I was associated with it. But having said that, I still have a viewpoint on green buildings. You know, green building indicators should be Indian. Okay, what we look at is we look at international indicators, platinum gold standards, platinum standards. Those indicators and those readings are good, but the implementation is very wrong. For example, a building in Mumbai has platinum LEED certification. The whole building is glass. Okay, now in the tropics like India, where you have such a huge sunlight, you have the full building which is glass. So you can just imagine the heat that the glass building creates internally, and the air conditioning that is required internally to counterattack that. What happens to the green in that? But the building is platinum LEED because it's met all the indicators that are meant to be. You understand what I'm saying? So when I mean green, I really mean green in an Indian sense. You know, look at the old structures, homes that were built. Look at the wadis that are built in Pune. I know you have a college in Pune. They were all around the courtyard structure, wherein the airflow was there, light was there. You have to build according to the environment you live in. Yes, it's good to know best practices. It's good to know what the world is thinking. Yes, it's good to have those indicators to meet. But implementing those indicators has to be very Indian, very, very Indian.
So if we at IICSR create something on the similar lines which you told, Would you back us?
Absolutely. I would back you absolutely. What is the green indicator for India? I mean, indicator, the platinum leads are fantastic. What they ask you to do is fantastic. But how do you implement it to meet those numbers is more important. You know, for example, I'll talk about a green building. So we have in Malad, you're in Malad, right? You have all those fancy buildings, but the mango groves are dying there. What is the green about it? You have all the glass buildings. I think that most of them are gold lead and things like that. But the mango groves, there were water tanks there. There were ponds there that don't exist anymore.
Yeah, totally.
So if those existed, your environment there would be much different from what it is with these glass buildings, no? So yeah, I mean, you have to look at the environment. Oh hell.
Now, this is one of the SDGs, if I may mention. So, when you have to plan out a smart village or a smart city, what would your approach be to ensure that it is sustainable and it is smart too?
Smart would mean equitable, no? When you have all kinds of people living, you have the rich and the poor. You have an equitable population that lives there, that makes the soul of a city that is smart, and the citizens of that city are environmentally progressive to be able to put. You know, you can have a glass, you can have a beautiful town. You know, Lavasa was a town that I worked on. It was part of the organization where I worked. And it's a smart city. It's absolutely green. All the parameters that existed in the world for green were all implemented there. Okay, but to have people you can put it all there, but it has to be practiced by the people that live there. You know, it had the Transact where there was just areas which were populated, that were walking spaces, so there was no movement of vehicles to create more greenhouse gases. And then as you moved up, you had sparse places, so that environmentally friendly. You recreated the land that existed there 50-60 years ago, and for the last 50-60 years it was destroyed. So when I'm talking about smart cities, smart villages, yes, we must put all the infrastructure that requires to be there. Yes, we must have all the water saving, electricity, blah, 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 all those components we should have. But also, what is the soul of the city? Now, for example, I'm not being critical, but Masdar city in Saudi Arabia is a totally green town, okay? But they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hectares of solar power panels. There are Indian workers that clean those solar panels with water. What happens to the greenhouse emission with all of that? They say that they are water positive city, because they import all the food. No, they don't grow anything there. But somebody somewhere is growing that food, right? What about that water footprint? Shouldn't it come to the people who are eating it in Masdar city?
Absolutely.
So that's what I mean by being smart. That's my concept of being smart. Yeah.
Great. So over the period of time, you must have executed so many projects, and some of them have been case studies in some of the Ivy League colleges. So which is that project which is closest to you? What was the criteria that you used in order to take up that project? What has been the impact of the project?
That's a really difficult question, Harsha, because every project has taught me something. You know, for me, a project is important because it's teaching me something. Okay, so there has been no project, two projects that have been equal ever. So they've really all taught me something. And some of the indicators why we chose a particular project. So let's take an example of the water projects that we are doing now. So I can't talk about a single project, but let's talk about a whole set of projects. So the stakeholders for these projects are the most important. And the risk of water in that region is most important. The access to water is most important. The availability of good quality water is most important. The availability of water is most important. I mean, there are places where there's no water available, and water tables are falling down, and people are not realizing that the water table is falling down. So truly speaking, working with the poorest of the poor, working with the ones that are the most needy for that product, which is water, has been the criteria for choosing a project. But having said that, location is something that I wanted to talk about. So our group companies that have plants, like we have Ashok Leyland and we have Gulf Oil that have factories. So the communities that live around these factories are our stakeholders, and these are our project areas. One of the, I mean, Ashok Leyland is probably the most water positive, the only water positive auto company in the world. That means it puts back more water than it extracts in its facility, not what it does in the community outside. So it gives you a license to work. It gives you the goodwill of the people there. So that is the and for our service provider companies like IndusInd Bank, Hinduja Leyland Finance, BFIL, it's the rural customer that is our stakeholders, and that's where we work. Again, they're rural customers that they have some of the poorest of the poor, and they're in the most remotest corners of our country, most remotest corners. So truly speaking, if I look at water, of course, it's closest to my heart and it's my favorite. We look at the worst districts to work in and to make them. I can't say that we can reverse the process, but at least we can make the conditions there better. And hopefully, in the next coming years, if those projects are sustainable and they are kept up the way they are, and my wish that the communities are resilient and self-reliant and they continue to do what we started there after we leave, they will become, come out of the water issue. Yeah. So truly, those are my indicators.
So apart from the water project, you have also pioneered education. What have been your key lessons in some of the projects that you must have executed? And how do you think that one can counter, especially what is your thought process on the latest education policy in India?
Well, the latest, I believe in lifelong learning and learning to learn. Okay, that lifelong learning is very important, and each child should have the capability to learn. So I think the new education policy is more towards that, which is really heartening. And that's what I find very, very encouraging. One of the early learning parts of the education policy, where it's looking into early learning and how to scale, how to strengthen it, is very heartening. So from an education policy perspective, overall, that's what I really like about it. I don't want to go into nitty-gritty. Again, education is something that I've just started to do. So I'm still a rookie and I'm still learning. But it gave me a really bad scare, because I started to do it just before COVID, and COVID happened and schools closed down, and we don't know when schools are going to open. And then I had all these horror stories of data that was given to me and sent to me saying that World Bank data says that children in schools in India have gone back a grade and a half back because of the lockdown in the last 3-4 months. So as it is, they were all in remedial classes. They were anyway behind grade level. The kids in grade 5 were not able to read, and we were working with them. And then this COVID happened and they went back. Oh my God. So my thrust into education was a time where I was thrown through in a deep sea and had to come up and breathe. So for me, education, the work that we're really doing is in remedial education, and it was meant to be for kids to bring them up to grade level. But now I think every child is a remedial child. So the delivery of how we are going to do it is very, very important. Yes, it's very good to say online education, but truly speaking, of the 2 lakh children that we have adopted, whose education we're looking into, only 40% have smartphones, and even those are not available with them. They're their parents' smartphones. So really, online education is not really a delivery system that is going to sustain itself or keep so that we have to look at different delivery systems. We're looking at, our partners are actually setting up community learning centers in panchayat offices and temples, in playgrounds, in people's homes, and our partners' field staff are going and teaching the children there. We've tried to send out, 60,000-70,000 workbooks and learning kits to children so that they can work. We're trying to teach children to learn by themselves. Again, like I talked about, learn to learn. So really, COVID has taught us that learn to learn is so important, so important. The child needs to learn to learn. If he can't learn from himself, then he looks at the peer to learn with, somebody, his friend who knows about it. If not, then somebody who's a grade senior to him who maybe knows about it. Only after that he goes to an instructor. If he can't find ways to learn, and then he goes to an instructor to understand a concept that he's not understood. So I think that is a delivery system that we have been working on. It's still work in progress. We've had some success in some parts of the country, but in some parts which are so remote, success has been low. So yes, that's been my education journey so far, so good. But truly speaking,
Now,
it was the best that I've ever done in my life.
yeah, it's a great place to work in space of education, because as you rightly mentioned, it's never ending. Now,
Schools will not reopen, or even if they reopen, they'll be the first ones to shut down because government has control of shutting it down. So truly speaking, smooth working of the schools, I don't know when we are going to see it. Truly speaking, I really don't know when we will have a good 10 days of children coming to school and education happening for 2 weeks also, because the first thing the government shuts down is education. That's because it's easy. It's because it's doable, and it's also because it's high risk, very, very high risk. So we don't know when it's going to get normal. I don't know when it's going to get normal. So we really have to work hard to look at deliveries.
Even the parents are scared to send their children.
Everything, everything.
Yeah. So Hinduja Group is actually a multinational group. How do they use CSR as a risk management technique?
Well, not really. Like I said, our founder's vision was, my duty is to work so that I can give. So really, not really. It's a risk management technique. But like I said, water, when you're working in the water space, none of our companies are water guzzlers, so to speak. But yes, water is used in our product and our services. But we are not guzzlers, so to speak. But it gives you the right to exist, right? It gives you the right to exist. It gives you it gets you the goodwill of the people around you, that you're thinking of something for them which is really a pain value for them. So that's, I'll give you an example. Ashok Leyland has their mother factory is in Ennore outside of Chennai. And in the 1980s, they had a huge water issue here in Chennai, and the factory closed down for 2 months. And they looked at it and said, hell, factories, and it was a mother factory, and it closed down. So they looked at water, and they worked so intensely in water that factory is actually about 100 meters from the sea, which is the Bay of Bengal. Okay, the Bay of Bengal is one of the most saltiest seas in the Indian peninsula. And the factory has, at 10 feet, has sweet water because of the work they did of recharging. They created a wall of sweet water between the salt water and the seawater. And why did that start? It started in the 1980s. It took them 10, 12 years to create that structure. But now they have 10 feet, they have sweet water. And all the villages behind that, to another 20 kilometers, have sweet water because of what they did in the factory premises. So again, it's the risk. Education. You are working with people. How are we going to have our future employees who will have skills like lateral thinking, working in teams, thinking out of box? How are we going to have those employees if we don't invest in education? So from a risk perspective, yes, that's how we are dealing with it.
Excellent. So CSR and sustainability is a wide area, and lately we have been very much exposed to NVGs and SDGs and ESG. So what is the most closest thing you would align your activities with? SDGs?
SDGs. We look at SDGs because they're very large and they're very detailed, and I've worked on it. I was one of the people that worked at the UN while those were being written, especially in the water. So because it's so close to my heart and I've been associated it from its founding days, we do work. SDGs is something that we look at. We actually, all our projects are mapped to the SDGs. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
We have also created a SDG rating methodology. I would like to mention over here from IICSR, which is our copyright. I'll show it to you sometime.
Good.
So now in the coming annual year and the times to come, would there be more demand for CSR and sustainability professionals? And we being an education institution, what kind of courses do you foresee an institution like IICSR to run in order to fill in the gap?
There are in India, there are more NGOs than beneficiaries that NGOs need. Okay, so but the NGOs are not equipped to really work on the ground. Now, why do I say this? I'll tell you my pain point, and I'm hoping that you'll have a course on that. My pain point is really the coordination work. You know, my NGO partners are fantastic. I have nothing against them. They're fantastic. The delivery that they're doing, we couldn't have done it ourselves. So really, they're fantastic. But one of the pain points that we have is there are so many actors in a project. How do you deal with all the actors? How do you bring them all together? You know, for example, take a project. There is a beneficiary, and in the beneficiary, there are different categories of beneficiaries. There is the children beneficiary, there is the gender beneficiary, there is a learning disability beneficiary, there is a physical disability beneficiary, there is a caste issue beneficiary. So how do you deal with all these different beneficiaries to look at them and not let one set of people overpower the other, because that's what happens in projects, right? You go to a village, the strongest people will want all the things done close to their home and not close to where the poorest of poor, the most deserving need. So how do you deal with them? Then now with this whole trying to go a longer journey with 1 rupee, there's a lot of convergence. Convergence is from foundations like us, convergence is from corporate industry, convergence is from government schemes, convergence is from banks like NABARD. How do you get everybody on the same page? How do you get everybody on the same platform and to develop a project and to deliver that project? And in time, yes, we're able to get everybody together. We're able to make a project that has all the actors in it, the beneficiaries, the government, the funders, the different kinds of funders, the community and the Shramdan they will give. But yes, we are able to make them all work together, but it doesn't happen in time. There are delays and delays and delays, and those create more cost overruns, which are not good for the project. And also, yeah, so I'm really hoping that you'll develop people who will be able to deal with this complexities of implementing and delivering a sustainability or a CSR project. Yes.
Niyati, next.
Yes, they are needed. Yes, they are really needed. CSR is to stay. CSR will always stay. It always existed, especially in a country like India. You and I, from the time we were little children, we've learned to give, and now it's just become corporatized. It's become more formal. It's become more statutory, which I don't agree with. I'll tell you why I don't agree with it. Many companies used to spend more than 2% of their net profit in CSR. Okay, and it was done through the heart because they wanted to do it. And then you had and don't get me wrong, I was part of writing those corporate rules also. I was part of the stakeholder from the outside world looking at those, and I was one of the devil's advocate. And now CSR is out of the finance department. They will tell you 2% and this is what you have to spend. And this is how you have to spend, and this is how you have to bring receipts back and bills back, and three codes for everything that is required. So it's become a whole financial modeling. CSR projects have become all financial modeling, and that's what statutory requirement has done. But yes, so the large companies are all doing it. It's the MSMEs that they wanted to bring into the ambit. And those are the ones that, yes, you could put the 2%, statutory spend. But the large companies were anyway spending much more. But now that spend has come down and it's, kept at 2%. So, yeah. What was the question? And what was the answering?
Yeah, you answered it rightly. On the course front, which you mentioned about NGO coordination, we have a course next week on NGO fundraising and branding. I will definitely update my colleague to include the NGO coordination.
Sure.
Yeah. On this note, I would like to invite my other colleagues for questions.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, can I?
Of course, sir, all yours.
Niyati, you have put it so nicely. You have put it so nicely. I have always been of this opinion. Like what we have done is we CSR has become a CSR spending obligation now. That's what I hear when I interact with lot of CSR heads. They say it has no long remained the way it was earlier. Like I was working with Aditya Birla Group. They are doing it for many years. This is a part of their DNA. But now what has happened with this new thing, with government coming up with new legislation like PM Care Fund, CM Care Fund, and so many, every department is looking for CSR money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what has it happened with you very nicely that it has become a spending obligation now.
Yeah.
In such circumstances, like your group, I know pretty well, the nice work you have been doing over a period of time in education, in hospitals and all. Don't you feel like that some point of time, they need to leave it to the corporates, to the companies to do CSR rather than making it statutory at every point?
Of course, I completely agree. I completely agree. But it's not in my hand. So I'm just trying to do the best with what is available. And luckily, truly speaking, at the Hinduja group, the mindset of the senior leadership is to truly want to do, you know.
Okay.
So I'm that way blessed that I don't have to deal with too many business related decisions to do a CSR project, so to speak. Otherwise, many organizations, the CSR projects are led of how the business wants it to happen. So luckily, it's not that. So we can still work with the poorest of the poor in the remotest location of Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh, when none of our businesses have anything to do, and work in really tough projects, and where impact indicators are a long way to come. Because one of the things that the finance guy will say, I spent ₹1, what is my return on it?
Yes.
My projects can't give it to you immediately.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Just tell me one question. Like say, what is happening with this COVID? Expectation of everybody, all the stakeholders from companies, it's increasing actually. People want more and more and more from government to the community. How do you deal with it? Everybody expects more now.
Yeah, I know. So truly speaking, a lot of our budgets have gone haywire because of COVID, because a lot of our programs that were new programs that were to start, that money has had to be diverted to COVID. But what do you do? There is a situation on hand that is killing people. I can't be saying, oh my, that lake I have to restore, because my storage capacity there will increase and the recharge capacity there will increase, vis-a-vis giving policemen in Mumbai PPE kits so that they don't get affected and they don't die. So really a lot of our budgets across the group have got affected because of COVID, because a lot of it has been diverted towards COVID. And another thing, 4 or 5 months of lockdown, a lot of our projects were standstill. Like a lot of our projects in the water field were to meet the monsoon, which happened in May, June, July, but our infrastructure was not ready. So we've lost this monsoon. When you lose a monsoon, then you lose the cropping for next year, then the investment, then the aspirations of the beneficiaries that we've promised them that this will happen. It's a cycle, no, all that is gone. I mean, I have some horror stories where some farmers were to get their daughters married and they were waiting for our infrastructure to come up so that they would have water for a second and a third crop. And from that second and the third crop, they would get money from which they were going to get their daughter married, and all that has gone down the drain. Yeah, but then COVID also is COVID, right? You can't close your eyes and say, no, I want that farmer's daughter to get married. The policeman and people can die and all this can happen. You can't think like that, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
I think Ninad also had the question which you all were discussing on, so maybe we can take that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Niyati, for for enlightening your perspective with respect to education and the way the projects were impacted, I was, every time you mentioned, I was seconding on that, because yes, I felt the same. Because most of our operations were offline. We used to interact with schools and colleges, schools and teachers, and because the schools are shut down, everything, we had to come with a change of plan and divert everything on online platforms. So now my question to you is, like the projects which you are trying to run right now, which was stalled due to COVID, are they going all offline, or are you planning to do anything on the online front as well? Because I believe
in education, delivery is different in different places. So like I said, offline is only 40% of our student population. But the other deliveries is we made learning kits. And those learning kits have been handed over to these children. Then we've set up community learning centers.
Okay.
It could be in the temple and panchayat, some places we've rented, where children are coming at different staggered time, 4-5 children. And our implementation partners, field workers, we call them resource person, we call them life skill coordinators. They are there all day long to help these children finish the work that they are trying to do.
Okay.
So yes, online is, because of the constituents of our education is, it's the poorest of the poor and the backwards of the backwards rural government schools. In some places, there is no data.
Yeah,
Forget
I can
smartphone.
understand.
There is no data. How do you reach that? To our good luck, our implementation partners, resource persons were from those very villages. And they all were trained, they all had tablets and laptops. So truly speaking, in the month of April and May, we sat around doing a study of who has a smartphone. And that's how I know 40% only have a smartphone out of the 2 lakh kids that we have. And then getting our resource person learn technology on the laptop that he has. He had a laptop, but before that, he was not using it to teach. He was not using it. He was only using it to monitor the progress of the child. So, all of May, we spent time teaching our field workers, our resource part, who are youth from the very villages, to use technology to teach them. To use technology in different ways. 5 children are coming into a class, 5 children are coming, all 5 are different age group. How do you teach all 5? It's not the same age group classrooms happening anymore. These are mixed age classrooms happening. So how do you teach them? So all of May, we spent time training our people to do the delivery. And then the delivery started. I'm not saying that it's 100% pakka. We're still learning. But yeah, like I said, online is only 40%. Offline is only 40%. I mean, online. And offline is community centers, learning kits, small group studies and things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Delivery is different everywhere. And it's ever evolving on a daily basis. Oh, this is not working, let's try this. And then in one place we try to replicate somewhere else. It doesn't mean it'll get replicated there.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
It's all about adapting the situations there, right?
Yeah. So in Gulbarga and in Odisha, we set up community learning centers, and the government allowed us to open it to let children at 5 kids at a time come there and to teach. But we set up the same thing in Maharashtra and Jawahar and Palghar. We've got 14 community centers. The government's not letting us open it because they're still scared.
Yes.
For that 5 child to come there also, with safe distancing, with mask, with everything, but they're still scared. It doesn't mean that what worked there works here. So every place is different, and we're still learning and we're still evolving.
The numbers in Maharashtra are quite high as compared to other places, so that is the main reason.
Yeah.
Ma'am, and one more question, like these the children which we are being adopted under your program, are these standalone children or under some school, or you have adopted a school and you're working on it?
The whole school. So we have about 6,000-7,000 schools.
Oh,
5,000, about 6,500 schools. The whole school we take. So we take the whole school, we look into the infrastructure, we look into the remedial learning, we look into wash, we look into nutrition, we give them breakfast because midday meal is there, but we don't have the kids. See, many of these kids, both the parents are daily wage earners. The school is a place where they send their child because they have to go to work. We don't know what they've eaten in the night.
Absolutely.
And when they come in the morning and if they're hungry, they're not going to learn anything. So there's a whole breakfast program. There's a whole health. So we look after their health. There's health checkups that are done. We're also teaching them music and sports, inculcate team, all the other, how do I say that? Skills that are required of teamwork, of lateral thinking, of doing things on your own, of thinking out of the box. So what are the various tools that require that? You went to a school where you had assemblies and you had teams and you had all of that. These schools don't have any of those things. So we're trying to recreate all of that. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Thank
really
you,
great.
Ninad, for the question. I'd like to invite Mr. Daswani. He has a question, and I'll also like to introduce Mr. Kusnur. He's a Swachhagraha
Hello.
and has been a promoter of clean water drinking. First, may I
Nice
request
meeting you,
Mr.
ma'am.
Daswani, could you please-
Sorry.
Nice seeing you, I said.
Thank you. Good to see you too.
Pleasure's all mine.
Mr. Daswani, would you put on your camera?
Yeah. Thank you, Harsha. Good evening, Mr. Sareen. This is Ramesh Daswani from the Light of Life Trust, Bombay.
Hello.
Hello, Ji. I must compliment you for being so expressive and so frank on your views and your journey. It was really very inspiring to hear all the kind of work you are doing.
Thank you.
I had a question for you. Since you are running such a large foundation, of late, there has been a tendency of foundations where they want to implement the projects themselves and not depend upon NGO partners, right? And this has been a trend which has been quite prevalent now. And I noticed you saying that you have very good NGO partners. So my question to you is, what is your real view on this strategy of foundations employing their own people and taking up projects themselves, vis-a-vis depending on implementing partners like ourselves? Like I'm running a very large NGO. Would you still prefer to deal with NGOs, or you still prefer to go down that corporate route and say, why don't we do everything ourselves?
No, I have both partners. I have other foundations working for us also.
Right.
Yeah. So no, I don't have a view. I don't think that there's anything wrong. There is enough work in this country, especially in India, for everybody to do. What I'm looking is for true partners. I'm looking for people who are really dedicated to do the job on the ground, to the true sense of getting that thing done, not for the sense of corporatizing it. Yes, we have some great foundations. We have Ambuja Foundation, we have Piramal Foundation that works with us, and they're fantastic. And because they're a foundation that has a corporate attached to it, there's a lot of the issues I was talking about of liaising with different actors in a project, documentation. Documentation work is very lacking in most social development organizations. They come very well prepared with it. So I don't have an issue. Truly speaking, I don't care who it is, as long as the work done on the ground is done to the true spirit.
Right.
Whoever it is has not lost the reason why they are there.
Okay.
Many organizations, NGOs have become so big that I had an NGO partner that had sent me a proposal where they were using a local NGO to do the work. It's an international NGO. They were using a local NGO to do the work. They had a state NGO overhead. They had an India NGO overhead. And they had a state office overhead. They had an India office overhead. And then they had an international office overhead. And then they have a Hollywood personality who is their brand ambassador. So his overhead. So my overhead was 40%. 60% was implementation. Why would I want to spend with that kind? I will work with the local NGO, and I eventually went and did work with the local NGOs, doing a fantastic job. Hinduja Foundation is Indian.
Right.
I don't need so many levels of corporatized NGOs to do my work for me.
Right.
I really need partners who really do work on the ground. May it be foundation, may it be NGOs.
Fine.
Yes.
That's a very
Hinduja Foundation
encouraging.
is not going to increase to hundreds of people. We are not going to do that.
Not
in the immediate time frame, no.
That's a very encouraging response. And one personal question: how accessible are you?
Sorry? Oh, very accessible. Ask Harsha. I pick up a phone every time. Well, I have nothing to tell her. Every time I tell her, I send it to the group, but I do pick up the phone.
So,
Thank
so-
you. Thank
so
you.
don't
Yes,
be-
she's
don't be
very
surprised.
kind and generous in that terms. So yes.
so don't be surprised if you hear from me very soon.
Sure, no problem.
Me too.
Okay, Nidhant.
Thank you.
Also, Doctor, thank you for your question, Mr. Daswani. Pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank
Dr. Subramaniam,
Yeah.
or should I call you Subbu? So
Please call me Subbu. Please call me Subbu. Just quickly, sorry to step in late. We had, I managed a society and had a committee. So we had a small committee meeting which extended, as you know how it happens. We do some work in drinking water and sanitation. And last 10 years, we've got technologies that are totally green. They don't require power. They work on gravity. They don't waste water. And similarly, So yesterday, I'll just take half a minute and tell about the latest innovation that we implemented yesterday. We implemented a program called as Being Swachh, which is a combination of a hand washing station and a water ATM managed by Women's Self-Help Group. And it is contactless, foot pedal based. A normal hand wash, if you open the tap, takes 8 liters of water. This takes only half a liter. And after washing, the gray water is treated and recycled back. Similarly, in the water technology, it works on gravity and it is sold in 300 ml, 500 ml, and 1 liter. Again, the electricity is only used for dispensation. And if there's no electricity, there's a foot pedal and the water is still dispensed by gravity.
Tell me, we've looked at individual water filters, but it's very difficult to sustain them.
Exactly.
We've given a lot of water filters out, but people don't understand how to use it.
Exactly.
Some of the water filters which are meant only for surface water, people are using groundwater in it. The filter chokes.
So in our case,
I prefer, but that doesn't mean that it is sacrosanct. I prefer to do large community level filtration plants so that there is a maintenance part that is looked at it properly, and over time the water that they're drinking is quality water that we had promised them.
Exactly. So for us, our technology is the treatment protocol is built on the chemistry of the raw water. It could be municipal water, it could be borewell water, it could have ground level salinity as well. We address TDS up to 3000, and our oldest implementation is 7 years old in Gulbarga, which still runs without maintenance.
Because we've taken up 12 villages in Gulbarga for our water program, our education programs. So we very strong presence in Gulbarga district.
So we have 3 types of interventions: retail like this, community where we do 10,000, 15,000 liter container-based models, and in schools.
So we need to talk because I'm having a lot of issues with, in certain parts of India where we want to set up these water filters for surface water, but today there is surface water, but 2 years later that surface water will disappear. So they will use groundwater, but there is no electricity, and I don't want to do RO. We've done 77 RO plants and they're successful, and we are recharging the groundwater. We're doing all the right things.
Yeah, but that's not sustainable beyond a point.
It is also sustainable for maybe 1, 2, 3 years, but after that I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
I don't know.
Is that we hand it over to the Gram Panchayat?
Yeah, so we've handed it over to the Gram. So we earlier had decided that we would, in some parts, we've given it to social entrepreneurs.
Right.
I don't know what's happened. I lost everybody.
I can hear you. I can see you.
Yeah,
God.
we can hear you.
But I've lost the screen. Okay, 1 second. Yeah, now I'm back. So, we've in certain places in East UP and in Rajasthan, we formed social entrepreneurs who we've handed it over to them, and we've helped them buy delivery vehicles because we have a finance and leasing company, and we have a company that makes the delivery vehicles also. So we've been able to give it to them so that they can, and we sell water at 4 rupees for a 20-liter can too. That's all for the operation and maintenance. So they'll probably sell it at 8 rupees or 10 rupees. That's the maximum. So some we've handed over to them. In Tamil Nadu, we built the village water committee. So we've handed over to the village water committees. And in some places, we've handed over to the Gram Panchayat with strict buy-ins that, AMC will be done by this organization for this much time, and this is the maximum you can sell the water for, not for 20 rupees or but maximum 10 rupees. So all of that. So just now the handover process is going on,
Fantastic.
but handover was very difficult, very, very difficult.
So fortunately, we'll speak aside after this. This is not a platform to discuss this more. So just a heads up, I have traveled 2,200 villages in the last 10 years.
Wow.
From Assam to Kanyakumari, and our team directly goes and engages with the community, the local panchayat, their party, and the administration of that particular state to ensure that whatever we are doing, if there's a check and balance. Along with
For me, one of the pain areas is I'm looking for non-electricity water filtering system that filters fecal. We are doing a lot of, we're restoring a lot of springs. We're restoring a lot of springs in the lower Himalayas.
Sure.
You'll be surprised. These springs all have fecal contamination. In Europe, you pay 5 euros for a Himalayan water bottle. You don't know there's got fecal contamination in it. 5 euros for that. So I'm really looking for some technologies to do that work there. Yeah.
We have a technology which works on gravity, which treats the fecal matter through a sewage treatment program, which is a bioprocess again. And unlike conventional STPs, which occur 70% water, we recover 98.3% water.
Okay.
No smell, no sludge, DRDO approved IIT Bombay technology.
Yeah, but that is for the sewage. I'm talking about filtering just service, drinking water. Anyway, let's talk about it. There's lots to talk. Yeah.
So whenever you have time, we'd love to understand your problems where you're facing.
Sure.
And first try and see if we can be of some solutions.
Harsha will connect us.
That's perfect. So nice of you. And your yeoman service that you're doing, please keep on doing.
Oh, no, not yeoman service. This is post-retirement. I've retired.
That's why
I feel good. It gives me a good night's sleep. Every night when I sleep, I think about aaj kya acha kaam kiya. So it's not human. It's my own need to do it.
So, हमारे बैलेंस शीट में एक तो फाइनेंशियल बैलेंस शीट होता है, दूसरा पुण्य का बैलेंस शीट होता है.
बस वही है. पुण्य भी नहीं है, ये फील गुड है. अपना हाई है.
अपना हाई, बिल्कुल. हमारा भी कोई 10 साल से फाइनेंशियल सर्विसेज छोड़ करके ये कर रहे हैं. I did a job in corporate India, or for that matter in BFSI. I quit this, started this.
Wow.
I have a good night's sleep for whatever we do. Sorry, I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, so it has been really engaging and insightful discussing with you on water and education and risk management and SDGs and so on and so forth. It has been wonderful to have you on our show. You have been a very vivacious and open person in terms of all the wonderful work that you've been doing. And very humble too, I should mention. Any final messages to all our viewers over here? And all
I would like to talk to your students. I mean, you guys, social entrepreneurship course that you're doing, fantastic, because we really, really need more young people doing work in smaller towns, villages, and bringing low-cost technologies to solve all our problems that are on the ground. So yes, absolutely. I was quite impressed by what you just before we were chatting, and I'm happy to meet everybody. Ninad, good job. I'm happy to talk to you.
Thank you, ma'am.
I like to see young people.
I'll take a picture. That is something that we do every time. Mr. Daswani, would you also switch on your camera? Okay, I'll just. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, Ninad.
Thank you, Nikhil.
No,
Thank
I'm really glad to meet you today. Surely we'll connect this week. Yeah, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you all of you.
Thank you for having me, Asha. I had a wonderful evening chatting. It gave me a lot of perspective to think. Some things that I said I had forgotten myself. So I said, now, oh gosh, I'm talking about it, but I'd forgotten about working on it. So some of those things have given me new perspective in life. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Stay safe. Be well.
Yeah, everybody. Yeah, bye-bye.